Hello everyone. Thank you all for coming tonight to our conference cycle called Homme, Territoire, Société. So this cycle aims to invite every month a researcher working in and on humanities in and about Indonesia. So this evening our guest is Thomas Ingicco, who is assistant professor at the French National Museum of Natural History. Before we start, I would like to thank our partners. So the French School for Asian Studies, who co-organized the event, and the French National Research Institute for Sustainable Development, also known as IRD, who provide their technical assistance. Also a few words about Thomas Ingicco. So he obtained his PhD in prehistory and then became an assistant professor for 3 years at the Archaeological Studies program of the University of the Philippines, Diliman, where he acted as director of the Zooarchaeology Laboratory. His research interests cover the Philippine and Indonesian archaeology. And in Indonesia, he's currently a member of the excavation team at Sangkiran and at Gunung in Java. But he will talk a little bit more about it himself. So please give a warm welcome to Thomas.
Okay, so good evening everyone. Indeed, we will talk about humans and monkeys in Java 12,000 years ago from a site that is near Pacitan, that is a Santos site in the Gunung Sewu area. But first of all, we have to define two of the terms from this title, just to be sure of what we are going to talk about. The first one is humans, which is not an easy task to define it when you are working on the prehistory of Java. And the second one is to understand what we mean by 12,000 years ago, what it implies. So just to start a bit early with the early peopling of Southeast Asia, the first out of Africa of humans, by humans we mean other species than our own species, which is Homo sapiens, happened about 1.8 million years ago in Georgia. That's where you have this circle here. This is the site, and that's the species found there that we name Homo georgicus. That is the first out of Africa, and the first one to colonize part of the world outside Africa. And one of the earliest sites after this Manusia site, where you have Homo georgicus, is Sangiran in Java. It is also dated to 1.8 million years for the earliest evidence. That is where you find the famous Homo erectus, Pithecanthropus erectus, discovered by Eugène Dubois by the end of the 19th century. That is at the foot of the Merapi Hills. And this Homo erectus will live there for several thousands of years. And you have a long evolution of Homo erectus on Java Island, while other hominin species, humans, which are named Homo ergaster and Homo habilis, still occupy Africa by the same period and will also continue to evolve there. By evolving there, they will give rise to our own species, Homo sapiens, sometime about 300,000 years in northern Africa. That is the earliest evidence so far of Homo sapiens, so our own species. And again, another out of Africa, this time by our own species, that will take place and arrive in Southeast Asia. The earliest evidence in Southeast Asia is now in Sumatra. That is a recent publication from last year. And this is a site in Sumatra that is named Lida Ayer. That is not the remain that was found there, that is a skull of Homo sapiens, that is prehistoric skull, the one from the site we will talk about soon. But here are the remains they found there. So this is the earliest evidence so far of Homo sapiens in Southeast Asia. This, from Homo erectus to these early Homo sapiens, the cultural toolkits technology are what we call Paleolithic, so old Stone Age. So they make stone tools and they use those stone tools to hunt and butcher the animals, and also most likely to use the plants as well. We have to consider that you have another migration after that, still by Homo sapiens, just to make it short, that will colonize also Southeast Asia. So that is another migration, but still by the same species, but a totally different concept, different culture. That's what we call the Neolithic, and these are food producers. This means that they produce their own food, which is still the case of our own societies nowadays. We still produce our own food. We don't go to hunt in the forest anymore or in the savannas. We produce. So this means domestication of the animals, and this happened sometime in Southeast Asia about 3,500 years ago. You have several centers of domestication around the world. Southeast Asia is one of them. Several species have been domesticated. Chicken in China, horse, etc., and pig as well in Southeast Asia. And for the ones of you who attended to the conference of Edmond Dunias, who is here, I think you've heard about this relation to pigs as well. You have a lot of centers of domestication of pig and several complex relationships to the pigs, but that's not the topic of tonight. The same happened for plants about the same time, 3,500 years ago, domestication of several plants, and then transportation of those plants during the migrations to new places and colonization of new places, and that's the plants that you have now in Southeast Asia. So this is the Neolithic. Our site is just before that. We are still in the Paleolithic, but I wanted to introduce you about this concept because of the production of food, because we will come back to that. This is an important concept because it is an important change of relation between human societies, humans, and animals. Here is an earliest evidence of this change of relationship between humans and animals. This is in Turkey. This is the site of Göbekli Tepe. It is still Paleolithic, that is not Neolithic yet, but you can already start to see on constructions, here animals are represented, and a change of status of these animals for those societies. The Neolithic in Southeast Asia, I've told you, several species have been domesticated and then brought away during migrations. These are the domesticated species that have come along with these Neolithic people, these Austronesian speakers. You have the pig, chicken, and the dog. This is easy for an archaeologist to identify because a dog does not look like a chagal anymore. Domestic pig do not look like a wild pig anymore. So just based on the anatomy and the skeleton, you can make the difference and identify them. So that is quite straightforward for animals we know as domesticates nowadays. It is a bit more tricky to identify a change of relationship of humans with animals for species, that are not known as domesticates nowadays. And that is quite challenging for an archaeologist. One example is indeed the monkey. Here you have a lower jaw of Homo sapiens and a lower jaw of monkey. This is from the site of Braulo, not far from the site we will study tonight, we will talk about tonight. It has been excavated by Professor Thomas Ingicco from Puslit Arkenas here in Jakarta. And if you zoom up on this part of the lower jaw, you see marks here that are nothing else but cutting marks, and the same you find on Homo sapiens, you can find them on monkeys. This means the exactly same treatment of the carcasses between the human cadavers, corpses, and the monkeys. And here already you start to feel that there is something special in the relation between those Homo sapiens and Homo sapiens from the Paleolithic, late Paleolithic, and those monkeys. This has been identified already by archaeologists famous archaeologist, American, as early as 1972. From several sites you find in southern Java. We are here. These are the Gunung Sewu. This is the Sangharan Dome I've mentioned before with the Homo erectus. We are in the Gunung Sewu, and you have several sites. That's the site of Barolo, where you have this lower jaw with cutting marks. And this is the site we will talk about tonight, which is Sanctorus, and where you find several monkey remains. And among those monkey remains, many of them are represented by facial bones, part of the skull, very well preserved like that. And that has been interpreted in the 1970s as suggestive of magical meaning. That's what we will see later, if this works or not. So the site of Sanctorus is in the Gunung Sewu, which means the southern mountains, but I guess you know that. That is the entrance of the cave. That is the drawing, the profile of the cave. These are the excavation squares, so where the excavation has been conducted by a collaboration between Postil Bernard-Kenas and Museum in Paris, so between Professor Truman Simanjutak and François and Anne-Marie Sema. And you have here the succession of accumulation of dust, of sediments, through time in the cave on more than 15 meters. So accumulation through time, this means that this accumulation of dust is older than the one you have here. So this is a representation of time, and you can divide this succession of sediments by cultural periods. This is the 15 meters deep pit. In the lowest layers that are dated to 300,000 years, you have some stone tools. I won't detail, this is not the topic. You have also an extinct pig here, and you have this is the tooth of a gibbon. This has been identified by a colleague of us, Mirza Ansuri. In the middle occupation layer, dated to 80,000 years, you still have some stone tools, a bit different, quite rough. Here you have bovids, so beef, right? And in the earliest layer, the one we are concerned with, 12,000 years ago, some simple stone tools as well, simple flakes, quite small in size. This is elephants that is now extinct in Java, and that's where you find those very well preserved faces of monkeys. If you look at the succession through time, starting from 80,000 years, you see the importance of each of those animals. So here you have the deer, pigs, and the monkeys. And you see that starting with the recent layers, monkeys account for up to 80% of the faunal remains. This is a lot. This means indeed a special relationship. Special relationship that is also underlined by some modified bones of those monkeys. This is a canine of one of those monkeys that has been pierced to be worn as a pendant, a necklace. This is the Homo sapiens burial from Sanctorus, and you find within this burial several of those monkeys. You have one of those faces here in the burial, just next to the left elbow, left arm. This is the back of the skull, just there, that has been burnt, and here a mandible as well, that is just placed at where the heart of this Homo sapiens used to be. So that is not a random position. But the distribution of those elements, this has been studied in detail by one of our colleagues, Budiman, that is here tonight. So if you have any questions later, I guess he can answer some of those as well. Another mandible here. So mandible, I mean lower jaw. Another one here. And another one here, just next to the Homo sapiens lower jaw. So you have several remains associated to these Homo sapiens, which means the special attention. They are gifts for this burial. So numerous remains of non-human primates. They are present in Homo sapiens burials. Many very well preserved mask-like facial bones. And you also have an osseous industry made out of bones of primates. I've shown you pendants, but you have several types as well. This has also been studied by a colleague of us, Kasman Setigama, who is sitting here also tonight. And again, if you have some questions by the end, I guess he can answer some of them. So, the straightforward question based on those observations is what was the relationship between human and non-human primates in Java during the end of the Paleolithic? First of all, who are those monkeys? If you compare the fossils from Sanctoros with the present-day monkeys you have in Java, they are clearly looking like this one, which is the lutung, the one we named lutung in here. They are quite numerous. You have more than 5,000 remains, which seems a lot, but that only accounts for 120 individuals, which is still a lot. You rarely find so many individuals in one site. So 5,000 remains for 120 individuals. Most of them are the one species I described just before, so 96% are this lutung, and only 4% are macaques. So clearly, this means that they targeted this lutung and not the macaques. So that is a deliberate choice. We'll see later if it's a choice for the species or a choice for the environment, because the two of them are not always found in the same environment. Most of the remains belong to females, but that is in accordance with the distribution of the proportion of males and females you find in natural living stocks. In a group in the wild, most of the individuals are females, about the same percentage. So that means no selections of females over males, it's just the natural representation. Most of the bones belong to the limbs, which is why you have the flesh, also the backbones, but most of them belong to the limbs, and that's also where you find the cutting marks, the butchery marks, that are related to the preparation of the corpses. And that is an indication of what they used to do with those cadavers, with those skeletons. So here on the lower, the hind limb, the femur, here on the humerus, you have cut marks here, you don't see very well, that is much clearer here. Same on the vertebra, so backbones of the tail, those ones, you have cutting mark here, so they also prepared the whole skeleton, not only the one with most of the meat, but everything. You also have some burnt bones. And some of them, I've told you, have been prepared into pointed bones, so transformed into tools used for something else. And you also have cut marks on the mandible here as well, just like you had on Barolo Cave. You have some of those cut marks also on the skull part, the back of the skull. I've shown you from the Homo sapiens burial. And this is, you have one mark here and two small marks here. I don't know if it's very clear. And this is indicative of beheading. So from these cut marks, you can start to interpret the process of the preparation of the cadaver. That's what you have here. That is summarized here. So the cut marks on the skull. That is, you have the marks on the ribs and the mandible I've shown you just before. That is for skinning and evisceration. Then marks on the pelvis and on the tail that is linked to dismembering. Then every single bone has been separated from the next one. These are the marks you find on the femur here, that I've shown you before, or on the tibia here. So these are the marks you can find here to remove the foot. That's why you have the Achilles tendon. So that's quite rough and you have to remove them. And the last stage, once you have those isolated bones, is to break them. These are the pictures taken by Kasman Setigama. Broken bones and then transformed into tools, then polished and works into pointing tools. So you have some of them here, one pointing tool, another one, and another one. And if you look at the other end, it is not quite clear if these pointed bony tools were hafted or not. So put on something to throw them. It is not very clear, but you have some marks as well to show if they were tied or not. Now, if you want to study more in detail the population, so how they hunted them, we know how they processed the corpses, how they hunted them. Here you have the sequence of tooth from the eruption, so milk tooth, until the total worn out of the teeth. So the youngest individual from the oldest individuals. This is just a schema from present individuals, and if you compare the tooth you find in your archaeological site and try to give an age of each individual based on either the eruption or the degree of worn of the tooth, you can have an idea of the structure of the population, how many youngs and how many old individuals. That's what you find here. This curve here, that is, in fact, with two peaks, young adults and sub-adults, which is more or less the structure of the population you have in the wild, in a natural living stocks, with mostly young adults and a few juveniles. So it looks like there is no choice over the weakest individuals, that would be the oldest or the youngest. That is the natural profile of demographic profile of this population. So you have absence of any selection within the population, which might be related to the difficulty to hunt such arboreal species, maybe trapping them, but that's not clear. And you also have, but I didn't detail it before, systematic absence of foot from bones from the hand compared to bones from the feet. And that is most likely, so it's either due to trapping methods, where the hand is caught and then you have to cut the hand to get back the corpse from the trap, or, and most likely this is the case because both hands are missing, you cut both hands and then with the skin you tied it up and then you can carry your monkey on such a long distance going back from the camp. So most likely those monkeys were hunted quite far away from the camp. If you look more in detail to those teeth, you will find some individuals with strange attrition, strange worn teeth. This is normal degree of aging. So the last tooth to erupt, which is this one, is supposed to be less worn out than the others. And here, this tooth, which is the last one, is much more advanced than the other ones. So that is totally abnormal, that is a pathology, and that is linked to some strange conditions. So for this, we studied what they used to eat to get this kind of pathologies. So for that, we looked at the teeth under the microscope, and if you look at the teeth under the microscope, you can see pits like that and striations. The pits are linked to eating fruits, and the seeds from the fruits will leave some such pits on the surface of your tooth. And striation is linked to the construction of leaves, because in leaves you have some silicium particles that leave some scratches like that. So by the proportion of pits and scratches, in comparison to different categories of primates, of diets of primates, you can know what your fossils used to eat. The fossils are represented by black squares here, and you see that most of the black squares are among the fruit eaters. What I did not precise is that those lutung monkeys nowadays are known around the world as the most leaf eaters monkeys. So you should expect them to be among this orange group and not among the green group here, the green cluster. It is more strange even more that fruits are quite acidic, and those monkeys have a stomach that is just comparable to the one of a cow or herbivore, so with the double chamber stomach, and they are supposed not to like too much acidity, that is not good for them. So it's quite surprising to have them here. No environmental condition, change in the environment, can explain this change of behavior in the diet. What we can suspect is that this is directly linked to this special relation with those humans. If those monkeys were somehow trapped, kept with the human societies and fed by them, you might have a change of behavior, at least for a short period of time. Because again, a change in environment, whatever the tree cover is, won't explain a change from leaves to fruits. So, to summarize, all skeletal elements of the primate fossils are preserved. So, the whole individuals of the whole skeleton, corpses were brought back to the site, except hands and feet. Hands in contrast to feet, and this most likely means that, as I told you, they were transported back from the hunting site, the kill site, to the camp with the skin, made a node with the skin. At the same time, we observe that you have a change of diet in those monkeys. So, first observation, that most of those monkeys were most likely hunted by those prehistoric groups and consumed based on the preparation of the body, but some of them had a different diet, and that is quite contradicting with the previous one. So, monkeys, we believe, could be fed by those humans. In fact, this is not totally contradictory if you imagine that you go to hunt, you find a group of monkeys, and among the targets, your targets, you have a mother with the baby clinging on it, and you kill the mother and feel somehow guilty with the baby, and you can take care of the baby. And this is a behavior known in present-day hunter-gatherers, this kind of relationship where some individuals are brought back and kept and raised as pets. So most likely you have a quite complex relationship between those humans and the monkeys. Most of them are consumed, are targeted, until killed, prepared for the food and also for their bones, used as tools. But some of them, a few, are kept as pets, kinds of, and could even be tamed and kept in the site, and these are the ones that you find in the burial most likely. That is a complex relationship that you find in Neolithic people, in food producers, but also in hunters-gatherers. They do practice pet keeping. So this means that you already have in those hunter-gatherers in Java Island 12,000 years ago, much before the Neolithic, the same idea that brought to the Neolithic, but for some reason it did not result in domestication of the monkeys. For some reason, one of those reasons can be that they were nomadistic, they were still linked to the environment and not producing anything. But most likely we are in front of such kind of complex relationship, and that is quite interesting to see that 12,000 years ago, much before the Neolithic, this idea is already there from some species that are not known as domesticated nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for this presentation. So it's now time for the Q&A session. So if you have any question, please raise your hand and I will give you a microphone.
Thank you. My name is Haider from Jakarta. As we know from the Harimau cave in Sumatra, Pak Truman concluded that there were some remains of Austronesians and some remains of Melanozoid, and also there was remains of interbreeding. So my question is whether this older Homo sapiens in Somtrus has enough remain for you to conclude what races they have. The Austronesian, the Aniswit, or still Negroid?
So the Austronesians are the Neolithic people, and the Australo-Melanesians are the Paleolithic people, supposedly. 12,000 years ago, we are with the hunter-gatherers, the Paleolithic people, the Australo-Melanesian, and not with the Austronesian yet. They are not present in Sanctoros. Actually, the succession of sediments stopped just before the arrival of the Neolithic people by 4,000 years ago. So we don't have any mix between the two, but that is one of the main research now. And Guarimau is a bit younger than Sanctoros. That is in Sumatra, in southern Sumatra. That is one of the main interests of research now, that is to know, as soon as those Neolithic people met with those early colonizers, those Paleolithic people, how much they interfere and they exchange. So biologically, some researchers say that on the mainland Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, you already have evidences of exchange, biological exchange, admixture, and also Patruman is saying the same for Guarimau. In Sanctoros, we have no evidence for that. All I can say about the culture is that most likely the idea of this change of relationship with the animals, in this case the monkeys, was already there. So culturally, you can have some convergence, but there are still totally different populations, at least 12,000 years ago.
Thank you. It's very good presentation. I have 3 questions, but short and brief. Number one is, when I saw your title, I thought that there's same origin between human beings and the monkeys. The one that we always heard from this theory of evolution, that human beings actually the same origin, but once you see your presentations remain different all the time. Number 2 is why the bones of this monkey is more useful to human beings as a tool rather than other animal bones. Number 3 is when do we stop eating this monkey? Except for several ethnic groups here in Jakarta, in Indonesia, like Minahasa and Batak people, although not all of them, yeah, few of them, or maybe some Chinese ethnic groups. When do we stop eating this? Is that because of tamed system as a pet or something else? Thank you.
So as for the biological relationship between humans and monkeys, indeed, that is the fascinating thing, is that because you find monkeys in the Homo sapiens burial and you know the biological proximity between the two, that's why you think right away that something special happened. Most likely it's not the case, most likely it's a special relationship to the forested environment. I don't think it is due to any biological proximity. Cases, most of the specimens have been hunted and were part of the food. So that is just the main source of proteins for those people. When did this stop? Actually, until the end of the stratigraphic filling of the cave of Sanctoros, we have this behavior. So it stopped at least. It continued until 4,000 years ago at least, and after that it's not yet clear. What we know is that in this whole area of the Gunung Sewu, we have most likely the same behavior in many of those caves, so in a large area. This behavior is also known in Sri Lanka now. You have a paper from early this year that shows the same, and maybe in Borneo as well. It doesn't mean that they are the same group of people. It just means that this is one of the prey in the environment. But that is quite interesting because they are surely not the easiest prey. Pigs are certainly more easy to catch. They are larger, so they produce much more food. So why monkeys and not pigs? maybe because of this production of tools, that's the question. Why those bones of monkeys are better than any other? It's not clear. Actually, in Sanctorus and also in Warholo, you also have bone tools made out of other species than monkeys. So it's not only monkeys, but a lot of them are made out of monkey bones. In fact, they are quite small. You just need to point them, and then they are quite nice darts if you have them. The main question, and that we do not have the answer, is whether those bone tools made out of monkeys were used to hunt much more monkeys. And that we don't know. And then you would have a very circular group of people, cultural people, where monkeys are really at every steps of the food chain and the production and the acquisition of food. And then you would expect that indeed they are quite fragile populations somehow, because they really rely on one species only, and as soon as this species comes short, then they are facing some difficulties, I guess.
Okay.
My name's Eska. I'm from Jakarta. My question is about the keeping of these monkeys, or like the domestication of them. As we know, like modern primates have what is called a high level of intelligence, such as found in chimpanzees. My question is whether that kind of intelligence was mirrored in primates from 12,000 years ago, which leads to them being helpful in the activity of hunting gathering, which is the purpose of domestication of, for example, dogs, in which they had help with hunting and gathering activities. Thank you.
So the evidence for close relationship with those monkeys is quite tight in the sites. I presented it mostly based on changing diet, which for me the easiest explanation is linked to this change of relationship with the humans. But we have no evidence for domestication. In fact, you have several steps before domestication. The first one is commensalism, so an animal comes close to you and eats from your remains, and that is already a change of relationship. That could have been the case for the monkeys. It's known nowadays. I mean, if you go to excavate in some places in the forest, you will have monkeys, mostly macaques, that come close to you and take your food. So that's a kind of relationship, but that has to be considered as well. Another type of relationship would be tame animals, so you put them in cage or with a rope. I'm pretty sure they were not in cages, for the simple reason that if you look at monkeys from zoos and the bones of those monkeys that are in cage for a long period, the bones of those monkeys are totally bended, they are curved, and they have a lot of pathologies that we do not find in Sanctorus. So for sure they were not in cages. Maybe you had a rope, but I don't know. And domestication, for sure it was not the case, because domestication means to take control of the population over reproduction, and that was not the case. So these are just a few individuals. The only evidence we have is through the change in diet. That can be commensalism, that's the most likely explanation. So that is very, very early stage of, although this is for a species that is not the macaque, it's mostly the lutung. You would expect that macaques would have the same behavior, so why not macaques and only the lutung? And that's why I believe that it is induced by the humans, so it's not only the monkeys coming to the human groups, but it's also the humans changing their relationship to those monkeys.
Hi, thank you. My name is Reza. Animal domestication always be interesting topic to talk, and I never heard that people domesticate animal because of we feel guilty. We domesticate animal because they could give us benefit. We domesticate the horse because we can use for transport, and we domesticate goat because they can feeding us, and I never heard that we domesticate the monk. You say monkey because we feel guilty, and what could the monkey benefit to human in the era? That's my first question. And the second one is there any this similar finding in the other part of the world? I mean, about the relationship within this human and monkeys? Thank you.
So again, I didn't say they were domesticated. Again, you have several steps before the domestication, and for sure, the monkeys from Santos were not domesticated. So the use of the monkeys, it is not clear. That's why I say it's just a few individuals and a change of relationships toward those few individuals. But most of them were just consumed, so just like natural prey in hunter-gatherers. Do we have any other evidences like that around the world? You have a few sites where you have monkeys also in quite high proportions in South America, but it has not been studied just like we did here, so we are not sure about the conclusions. But other places in Southeast Asia, most likely in Sri Lanka as well. And for Neolithic populations in the Philippines, we know a burial of a monkey. So you have a monkey burial next to a burial of a dog, so you have something, but that's Neolithic people, it's more recent and it's another social group.
Someone else for a question? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Ali from Jakarta. You mentioned earlier in your presentation that some of the monkey skulls served a magical purpose. And do we know exactly what those purposes are and whether they were connected to the early formation of the Austronesian belief system in Indonesia? Thank you.
So that was an idea of this archaeologist by the 1970s because of those fast-like remains. I believe that you have many of those faces, mostly because they are well preserved in the burials. That's why you find most of them. But you don't only find them in the burials. The fact is that this part of the skull would survive longer than the other parts of the skull that are thinner and will be destroyed through time. So I think it's just a matter of preservation and nothing to do with it's not that they kept those faces, it's just natural process of fossilization that conducted to the preservation of those masks. But that was the idea in the 1970s, and that is the start of our research. So this is something interesting to consider, but I don't think it was the case. At least we have no evidences for that. And the second question was Austronesians. Again, we are not dealing with Austronesian people. So Austronesians come, it's another migration. They met with those people, for sure. How much they interact, we don't know yet. We have some evidence from Guarino, from Vietnam as well. So you have the interactions. The cultural interactions are not clear. We know that those Neolithic people arrive in the Philippines. They come with their domesticated animals, so the pig, the dog, and the chicken. No chicken, most likely they domesticated them in the Philippines, and then spread from there. What we know from one site, studied by a colleague of us in northern Philippines, the earliest site for Neolithic in island Southeast Asia, is that although they arrived with domestic pig, most of the pigs you have in the sites are wild pigs, so they are still going to hunt, and most likely they keep the domestic pig, that is much rarer, for special events. So most of the pigs are domesticated. So that is the main source of protein for those Neolithic people, and the monkeys are not part of the game anymore.
Any other question? You? Okay. No. So I think it's the end. Once again, thank you very much, Thomas, for this presentation, and thank you to all of you for coming tonight. We hope to see you next month for our next conference. And for now, if you want, you can go in the lobby for some refreshments, and you will be able to continue the discussion with Thomas. Once again, thank you very much.